Good afternoon, everybody. Really, I think this presentation is going to build on what Sue's already talked about. In particular, the collaboration between engineers and landscape architects is vital for successful delivery of SuD schemes. We've got a lot of experience now that shows us that is the case. Sue's already mentioned craters. Far too often we're seeing these big, deep attenuation ponds with steep side slopes that, as Sue said, they're dangerous, they're not attractive, and that is what gives SuDS a bad name. So there we have an actual crater, which is in the centre, or towards the centre of Auckland in New Zealand. Right, let me... My IT manager is gone and I can't make the slides go. Okay. Right. Okay, so the key to success on difficult sites. Now I've been working in SuDS and designing SuDS since 2001 and I've yet to find a site where it's not possible to put some element of green SuDS in, as Sue mentioned earlier. Quite often, in my experience, the best sort of suitable schemes for a site are a combination of storage tanks and green features. But as Sue said, you should start off trying to design in completely green features and only start including engineered measures when the constraints lead you to use them. So the key to success, you need qualified and experienced designers who understand the principles. So we need engineers who understand the fundamentals and aren't just engineering by rulebook. We've got to be open-minded on all sides, use the most appropriate methods for the locations, and we've got to be careful about using rules of thumb that we use in drainage design for traditional drainage, because they may not apply to SuDS. So in summary, what we do, we identify the constraints for a site and we design around them. So we think, we analyse, we adapt and plan. So you can see on the right hand side there's just a picture of a swale in a housing estate, and they've clearly thought about that in terms of design and construction process, because we've got to realise that particularly on housing sites, we've got to think about how SuDS are going to be installed and how they're going to be constructed. So what they've done there, they've built the swale, and they've built it in advance of when it'll actually become operational, allowed the vegetation to become established. And you can see on the left-hand side that when they actually place the wearing course, the final surfacing on that road on the left-hand side, it will come up level with the curb, and then the water will flow over the edge into that curb. But until that point, during construction, the swale is protected from runoff, so it can establish. Similar situation up in Scotland, entirely inappropriate use of a filter drain alongside a road. You can see there that you've got over the edge drainage again, running onto a filter drain, but what the designers have failed to take into account is the fact that there's a sports centre just up the road from where that filter drain is, and it's basically used as a car park, and it is becoming clogged up. So you've really got to think about, there are wider issues you need to think about when you're designing SuDS. Some issues why people sort of put forward that you can't, why SuDS is not appropriate, and one of those is SuDS is expensive. So there have been numerous studies on costs. In 2013 there was a DEFRA study that I was involved with WSP and HR Wallingford. And in 2017 there was a Welsh Government study, and in all those cases, effectively well-designed landscape-based SuDS should be cheaper than traditional drainage with underground storage. But crucially, there shouldn't be any extra land take for those surface SuDS features. If they're well planned and well designed into the landscape, there should not be any extra land take, because as soon as there is extra land take, the balance in costings changes, and SuDS do become expensive. It always amuses me when people say, how can we get information about the cost of SuDS? We're pricing things up all the time. You know, we know how to cost up construction works, and SuDS is no different. So it should be a straightforward exercise for engineers and landscape architects to come up with costs for SuDS schemes. So what is the difference in cost, and why have we got this difference in cost between traditional drainage design and SuDS? So if you have a look here, this is something that we put together for clients in the Middle East, in actual fact, which is why it's got palm trees on it. But the same principles apply across the world. So in conventional end-of-line water management, you take the water from the roofs, whiz it down the downpipes into a pipe. So you've got 150 mil pipe at the top. As you go through the site, you add more and more water from roofs and from car parking and similar hard surfaces. So you need bigger pipes to move that water across the site. And you need a gradient on those pipes, so generally they end up getting deeper and deeper and bigger and bigger. You then get to the edge of the site and think, I need to manage this. Right, we've got polluted water from the car park, so we need to put an interceptor in there. So you have a deep, either oil interceptor, separator, or some sort of deep manufactured treatment device in the manhole. And then you put a attenuation tank on the end of it. Again, because of you've just shifted water across the site, you've got a deep attenuation tank. So in that case, you've got 1,000 cube of storage, and you've got an extra treatment device. Right, there we go. So if we look at a source control water management approach or a SuDS approach, effectively what we're doing here, we're controlling the water at source. So we're controlling it using green roofs or blue roofs on the roofs. We're controlling it in the car parks. We can be using permeable pavement, we can swales, basins, but everything is shallow. But crucially, what we're doing, we're controlling the flow so that we're not passing forward big amounts of water and transporting it across the site. So you can see there, in actual fact, the storage we've got is still the same. We've still got 1,000 cube of storage, but it's shallower. A lot of it is probably just landscaping features, and as such there's probably not a lot of extra cost in the construction of those, but the big saving is in the pipe work and the amount of pipe work we need to move water around. And also with SuDS, particularly things like permeable pavement, swales, basins, the feature that we're providing to provide the hydraulic control also provides the treatment. So in effect, we're getting treatment for free and we don't have to pay for extra devices. So we do know that SuDS can end up being more expensive because we know that from speaking to developers. So why does it end up being more expensive? And at the moment, there are some issues that we need to resolve. So adoption issues at the moment have resulted in doubling up of surface water systems, with one for house drainage and one for highway drainage, which is ridiculous, and it will make SuDS expensive. Another real problem is that water companies will not recognise the contribution of private source control. So we're putting features into driveways like permeable pavements, but we're still having to size pipework and other storage as if they're not there. And again, that's pretty silly. We need integrated design. Sue's already shown that poor design of systems results in large land take for end-of-line features. We have seen instances where local authorities will not consider multifunctionality of open spaces. So the open space needs to act as the open space, but also as the SuDS features. And with good design, they can do that. We've seen cases where unrealistic commuted sums are being asked for maintenance by adopting authorities, and again, once you start to add that onto the cost of construction, that can make things not cost effective. In other instances, we've seen contractors who are unfamiliar with the methods applying risk premiums to SuDS construction. So particularly with permeable pavement, I've seen contractors who've not done it before just overprice it because they're not familiar with it. And recently, we see unreasonable requirements from people that can have an impact on SuDS. So recently, I was made aware that water companies are requiring barrier pipes below permeable paving. which again, there's no need to do that. And utilities not allowing services below or crossing swales. So the other issue is maintenance costs. So really with SuDS, we need to maintain the SuDS to ensure they operate effectively as a drainage system. That's the #1 requirement. But to do that, actually doesn't need that much work. Most of the work with SuDS is ensuring that they actually look good with the landscaping SuDS. Because if you don't look after them and keep them looking nice, very, very quickly you will get residents complaining about the fact that they don't look particularly attractive. So the main items from a hydraulic point of view are regular inspections and a review of the maintenance regime. So inspect flow controls, inlets, outlets to make sure they're not blocked and everything's working happily. From a hydraulic performance point of view, vegetation management is not that critical, but it's the visual appearance that's the driver for that. And so that is what will drive the regular maintenance. But in Sheffield, they've been doing some research, and they're now looking at how they can use low maintenance vegetation that still remains attractive and acceptable to the public. There's lots and lots of guidance and information about maintenance costs, and that's listed just there. And the SuDS manual has lots of items that may be required. Now, if you go along and come up with some maintenance costs that is based on applying every single one of those items that may be required to every single feature, very, very quickly you're going to end up with unrealistic maintenance costs. So we need to use risk management and contingency sums to cover the fact that you might need to do that work on some systems, but you certainly won't need to do all those things on every system. And also, we've got to. I've seen some very, very unrealistic reconstruction costs being included in whole life costing. So, for example, for a swale, if a swale is going to go wrong, it will have silt building up in it, or the vegetation might need fixing. I can't see any situation where you would actually have to whole scale rebuild the swale to fix it. So we've got to be a bit more realistic about what we're asking for in terms of commuted sums. And just an example here, this is a basin on the M25 that I have the pleasure to go and visit every 3 months. So this is an old scheme. It was installed back in the early 90s when a lot of the thinking was different. And you can see there that when the original maintenance plan, when I got involved with it, was 3 monthly strimming of the whole basin. It's got a low flow channel through it, a concrete line that just allows the water to bypass that whole basin. And effectively, it's just an attenuation basin. So when I got involved, I thought, hang on, that's a bit silly. We'll restrict the regular strimming to the grass slopes, but allow that channel to become overgrown. In the course of that, we've saved the contractor who looks after it a significant amount of money in terms of regular maintenance. But more crucially, it actually performs better as well. So by allowing the vegetation to build up, it filters out the pollutants better on a day-to-day basis. And we're not getting the build-up of silt at the far end of the basin that we used to get. And you can see there, there's some very rare snail has appeared in there, and some rare orchids that my ecologist friends told me is a good thing. So other reasons why we can't use SuDS for ground conditions. Frequently people tell us that the ground conditions aren't right for SuDS. Well, that's not true. You can put SuDS into any site with any ground conditions. It will just influence how you design the SuDS and what methods you use. So there are tools available, and that's one example, the British Geological Survey SuDS infiltration map. So frequently we're told you can't use permeable pavements because it's underlain by clay soils, which is not true. If you have got clay soils, you use permeable pavements as an attenuation device. And you can see there's an unlined rain garden on clay soils, and all we've done there is provide an outfall back into the drainage system rather than relying on infiltration. What I would say is that you can use wider infiltration blankets over wide areas in relatively low permeability soils, down to about 1 × 10⁻⁷ in some cases. But also, crucially, infiltration to clay can help provide interception, which, if you read the SuDS manual, interception is one of the key requirements that you should be providing in your drainage design. Contaminated sites, again, it's possible to use SuDS where contamination is present, but the SuDS design must take account of the remediation that's going to be carried out. And you really need cooperation between the drainage designers and the remediation designers. So on the right-hand side here, you can see examples of SuDS basins that have been constructed over processed landfill material. We excavated out a landfill, processed it, and put the material back in the ground. So it is contaminated. It's producing some landfill gas. So you can see there the SuDS ponds have been lined to keep the water in and stop it infiltrating into that material, because we don't want it to do that. But it also, because of the landfill gas generation, we've vented below that lining, so we don't end up with big balloons flowing up in the middle of it. And also, there's an allowance for settlement in the design. And at the bottom, you can see the finished item. Infiltration close to buildings. Again, we frequently get engineers telling us that we can't use infiltration because there's not enough space, particularly from permeable pavements. And that's because in the building regulations there's a thing which is commonly referred to as a 5-metre rule. Now that's a rule of thumb that was intended for deep, normal circulays. It wasn't intended to apply to shallow blanket type systems such as permeable pavements and rain gardens. If you go to France, for example, they have the 3-metre rule, I think. If you go to Germany, it might be the 4.5-metre rule. So it's simply somebody stuck the finger in the air and said, if you keep them from 5 metres from a building, we'll probably be okay. There is more detail on how you can override that and more supporting evidence. There's a fact sheet on infiltration near buildings on the susdrain website, and the website address is down the bottom there. But crucially, what you must do if you are infiltrating close to a building is obtain advice from a geotechnical engineer, because in some instances you might not want to infiltrate even from permeable pavements. This is an example of an unlined rain garden close to a building that Bob Bray designed quite a few years ago, and we helped him with this. But then what we've crucially done, we installed soil moisture gauges in between the rain garden and the building. So I spent a happy day digging holes and installing those. And what we've seen from that is that there are no adverse effects on the soils below the foundations from the low level infiltration that you're getting from a shallow scheme like that. So you can see there the water only builds up to 150, 200 mil depth, and there's no driving force sideways that would influence the foundations. You also have to consider the building foundation types. So again, infiltration will have no effect on deep hard foundations. So on the right hand side at the bottom there you can see a basement construction where you've got very deep piles. If you allowed a little bit of infiltration on the outside of that, from a structural point of view, wouldn't have any effect whatsoever. What you do need to consider if you have got a basement like that is whether it's got a waterproof design or not, and the impact on leakage into the basement from the infiltration, because we have seen just leakage into basements just from leaking irrigation pipes. And then finally we'll move on to health and safety. So Sue's already alluded to this, but it can be addressed easily in SuDS design without big and ugly fences or preventing access. And it shouldn't be a reason for omitting surface water features. Well-designed SuDS are inherently safe. And there's a framework in the SuDS manual and checklists, again, on susdrain.org. And those were developed with assistance from ROSPA. They're based on an approach that ROSPA used for assessing risk in ponds, in your local park and duck ponds, things like that. So it's a well-established procedure for looking at health and safety. It's about balancing risk and benefit, and you can see there's some statements from ROSPA. On the top one at the bottom, it's we must try and make life as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. and fencing is an effective but comparatively expensive option, which does not remove all risks arising from water. My view is if you have to put a fence around it, you've not designed it properly. And you need to think about some of these things. So you can see on the right hand side here, that's a basin. So does it really need life-saving equipment around something that's only going to have water in it occasionally? And you can see there lots of signs prohibiting access. On the top you can see that head wall, inherently dangerous. You should be designing that so you don't need to put those signs there. And I'm sure that if Sue had got hands on this, she would have been able to design that slope. Even with those gabion retaining walls, it could have been designed so it was accessible. Because at the moment, that is a dead space in that development. And you can guarantee that it will be a magnet to kids. So why not design it so that they can use it in the first place? And really think about, is rescue possible as well without lifeboats? So you can see here, this is a scheme near me. On the left-hand side, I've circled a lifeboat there. Now I can tell you that I've never actually seen any water accumulate in that basin. It's probably been there 5 or 6 years now, and I regularly go down there when it's raining. I think if it does accumulate in there, it will probably end up being about 300 or 400 mil thick. Do we need lifeboats, or can adults just wade in there to get people out if they do get into trouble? So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. Let's just see what questions we have for you. Okay, so I have Steve by me, so he might be able to select which questions he actually wants to ask rather than me just allocating them.
Right, so there's a thing there. What rules of thumb are you referring to? So one of the examples is mainly the 5 metre rule, where people use that. But also the rules of thumb that people have used in the past about the size of orifice controls. So quite often you will find there are requirements from water companies that orifice controls or flow controls have a minimum diameter of 75 mil or 100 mil. Now that's fine if you've got gullies in a traditional system, because you can get things into the drainage system that will cause blockages. But in a SuDS system where, for example, water's being filtered through a permeable pavement, you haven't got that risk of blockage, so you can use much smaller flow controls. And in any event, we would protect them so that they can't become clogged. So again, we've used 15 mil diameter flow controls in the most extreme cases. So there's one about permeable pavements down there. How do permeable pavements hold up in a car park, and is there a limit on vehicle size? Permeable pavements are very effective. Concrete block permeable pavements are, and if they're constructed properly, and that is the key to it, if they're constructed properly, they should last as long as normal block paving. One of the issues is that with the jointing material, it is difficult to get the jointing material fully into the joints, and so normally after it's been trafficked for 2 or 3 months, you need to go back and re-grit it to ensure that it's full. And if you do that, they should last as long as normal permeable pavements. But if you don't do that, they can fall apart. The other issue is they're very effective, and you can design them to carry HGV loading in straight lines where it's running. There's not a lot of turning on it. But if you have got a lot of turning on it, it's less tolerant of tight turning HGV vehicles, and we would look for a different solution in that situation.
Do you want to ask this a little bit? So supplying starts to small sites, e.g. less than 1 hectare, which conflicts with the financial aspirations of the developer, and where sloping walls, other vernacular booger moves don't really provide the answer. So it starts in tight spots?
Well, if you see that last picture on my presentation, that's an urban development, and we've worked with planners excuse me, on quite a few of these sites, and I'm sure Sue's worked on similar sites as well, where that is integrated SuDS into an urban development. So there are always spaces in a development, and there are other examples in the SuDS manual that show how you can do it. So rain gardens, for example, we've retrofitted rain gardens into dense urban developments. It really is, you've got to look for the opportunities and where you can do it, but there are always opportunities to do it. Now, it might be that in those situations, you do end up putting, for example, attenuation tanks below rain gardens to increase the amount of storage you've got in there. But it is always possible. We always have landscaping areas in these situations, or there are always places to put permeable pavements.